Church, we are indeed honored to have with us as our special guest, Greg Koukl. Many of you know Greg Koukl. You've read his books. In fact, he's one of America's most prolific Christian apologists, having been given far-reaching platforms to defend the Christian faith. Greg has been given the chance to speak to more than 90 university campus, not only here in the United States, but abroad as well. In fact, just a few days ago, you were at Kennesaw State University, not far from here. He has been part of call-in radio for over 35 years, discussing and defending the Christian faith. He and his wife, Steve, make their home in Thousand Oaks, California. Folks, let's give a great First Redeemer welcome to Greg Koukl.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That helps a lot. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for that. It was a great prayer you offered regarding Charlie's family. I want to add one thought. And the thing that occurred to me when I found out, and I didn't know Charlie, but one of my closest friends was Charlie's mentor. And he was standing just to the side of Charlie when the shot rang out. And he held his hand all the way to the hospital. And what I thought for the body of Christ was that every single Christian who walks closely and faithfully with Jesus will have to pay a price. Doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter what community you live in. If you're going to stand for Jesus, you're going to have to pay a price. Different people pay different prices. Some less, some greater. Occasionally, and rarely, fortunately, in this country, some people pay the ultimate price like Charlie did. But every one of you is going to have to pay a price. And there are many Christians around the world that are paying that price right now, and in history, for 2,000 years, they've paid that price. So when things get hard for you, and you feel the pushback and the hardship and the difficulty, think of Charlie. Count the cost and put your hand to the plow and never look back, right? We got work to do today. And I want to make a kind of a prediction about what's going to happen in the next 40 or so minutes. And in a few moments, I'm going to make a promise to you. And the prediction is that if you pay attention to what I have to say just in the next 40 minutes, maybe you take some notes, jot some things down, but you don't even have to do that. I like it when you do. But if you just pay attention to the basic things that I'm going to offer you, my prediction is that your life is going to change in the way that you engage other people for the cause of Christ. And it's going to get a lot easier, and it's going to be a lot more effective. And the reason I say that is because I've had so many people that have come up to me after they've read this book, and this session is based on this book called Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. And they come up to me after having read and put into practice the tactical material that I'll talk about this morning. And here's what they said to me, and I get the same sentence all the time. I hear the same thing, and they say, Greg, this book changed my life. This book changed my life. And now that's pretty humbling, to be honest, and very flattering. I'm glad to hear that. But in a certain sense, I'm not surprised, because in the half a century that I have been walking with Christ and engaging people for the cause of Christ, when I began to employ these principles, it changed my life too, in the sense that I could engage more effectively. All right, and so this is my prophecy, my prediction, if you will, about you. Now, there's a caveat here. If you don't do it, it don't work. All right. Now, we had this great conference this weekend. This place was absolutely filled. It was so magnificent. I want to thank you, Pastor, just for your hospitality and your great ground team. You guys did a super job. We're looking forward to next year. Yeah, amen. But there are problems with these kind of conferences. I mean, if you go to conferences like this, you'll learn a bunch of things, especially apologetics, how to defend your own convictions with other people who are taking task with you. The problem is a lot of times you get great information, but then there's something missing. And what's missing is a bridge from the content to the conversation, or from the, maybe from the scholarship to the relationship. How do you take all this stuff that you're learning that you found really good and very compelling and get it into conversation with people? And that's what this session is all about. But there's going to be a couple of surprise moments, though, I think, for you, because I'm going to say a few things that, boy, you might even disagree with, which is okay. But hear me out, because I think they're foundational to this approach that I've found to make such a radical difference in my life and engaging other people. And the first thing that I want to say that's a little controversial, I guess, is when I get in conversations with people about spiritual things, in that particular conversation, I do not have it as a goal to lead that person to Christ. In fact, I don't even have it as a goal in that conversation to even get to the gospel. Now, do I want them to become Christians? Absolutely. And is the gospel necessary? Of course, it's the power of God to salvation to all who believe. But I'll tell you something. I became a Christian during the Jesus movement. And evangelism was pretty easy back then for a couple of reasons. First of all, people understood what you were talking about, okay? When you talked about the simple gospel, people understood the language and they basically understood the ideas, all right? And there was always objections back then, but there weren't as many as today. That was half a century ago. Nowadays, things are different. People don't understand this language. They know it's religious language when we talk about the gospel, but a lot of times all they're hearing is kind of religious noise because they heard the words, but they don't know what they mean, not anymore. And largely, we are talking past them. And not only that, there are a whole lot more objections than we ever had before, and they're unique. I mean, I didn't have, during the Jesus movement, and I'm leading people to Christ, I don't have to deal with all what they call now kind of the pelvic issues, you know, all the things that relate to sexuality and same-sex marriage and gender confusion, dysphoria, and all of that. We didn't have to deal with that. It wasn't part of the culture, all right? There are new challenges that come up, that challenges to the Bible, much more aggressive than ever before. So the landscape basically has changed dramatically, okay? And so this is why, in my own mind, I realize we can't get to the gospel just like that and think that people are going to understand it. Now, in the South, it may be a little different, but the South is changing too. I'm just saying, all right? And I want you to think of something that Jesus said in the parable of the sower. Most of you are familiar with this. Now, did you ever have this experience where you read a passage a whole bunch of times and then all of a sudden, the next time something stands out that you didn't see before but was sitting right there before your eyes? Yeah, well, that happened to me when I read the parable of the sower. And you know there's 4 types of soil, and the sower goes out to sow, and Jesus is talking about that to the multitudes, and he talks about the first type of soil, and that's when the seed goes out, and it lands on the road, and the birds come and carry it away. Now, he's going to explain this to his disciples in more detail, what he's talking about. But it seems to me that's an easy one. You know, you're talking to some knucklehead, some hard-headed person. You talk to them about the Lord, you spread the seed, and bounces right off their hard head, right? Okay, that's easy. It's interesting, though, the way Jesus characterized that. When he explains in Matthew 13, verse 19 and following, what he meant by this parable to the disciples, here's what he said about the first seed. He said, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom, watch this, and does not understand it, and does not that's the phrase that just jumped, where'd that come from? I didn't notice that before. Anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the evil one comes and takes away what has been sown in his heart. So it's not bouncing off his head, it's getting in there, he can't make sense out of it. And I have this sense that as time goes on and culture changes rapidly, and the way we communicate the message hasn't changed. I'm not talking about the content. The content doesn't change. But the way we communicate has got to adapt to the ears of the culture so it makes sense to them. That's a lot of what we're doing in our reality conference on Friday and all day yesterday. If we don't do that, if we don't adjust, they're not going to make any sense out of it. And notice, by the way, when he explains the fourth seed, it lands on the soil, and that's the soil where the person hears and understands and bears fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold, all right? So I want to tell you a concept in a moment that's really transformed me, but I want to say something else that is the second, like, okay, fasten your seatbelts. Because I said before, this guy doesn't want to get to the gospel necessarily and say, bring someone to the Lord in an individual conversation. And some of you understand this now because a lot of times we need more pre-evangelism, right? As Francis Schaeffer used to call it. Pre-evangelism. Okay, fasten your seatbelts. I actually haven't prayed with someone to receive Christ in over 30 years. I know what you're thinking. What a loser! Because that's what so many of you are thinking about yourself because you haven't closed the deal, so to speak, with someone. But I'll tell you this, I have never been more effective for the gospel than I have the last 30 years. And it's because of this principle that just began to gel in my mind. And I'm going to give it to you right now. It's like an aphorism. It's a simple statement that's easy to remember generally. Jesus used them all the time. He was last shall be first. Simple aphorism, for example. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are. So that's an aphorism. And here it is. Before there can be any harvest, before there can be a harvest, there's always got to be a season. Let's just call it gardening, okay? Before there can be a harvest, there's got to be a season of gardening. No duh, this is easy, right? Certainly in agriculture, but we don't always think about that when it comes to evangelism. But of course, most of you who have become Christians as adults, that was my case, you are aware that there was a period of time, this season of somebody gardening in your life, making a difference in your life, helping make sense of all of these new things you're considering before you finally made a decision for Christ. And in this regard, I want you to think of Jesus in John chapter 4. It's a well-known passage. That's the woman at the well. But I want you to think about what happened just after the woman at the well, okay? She goes off to Sychar. The disciples come to him. They weren't privy to that conversation. And Jesus says to them, you say there are 4 months and then come the harvest. I say to you, look on the fields. They're white with harvest. Now, I don't think Jesus was saying every field was white with harvest. That seems obviously not the case. But Sychar was. And we found out in the next couple of days there was quite a harvest there, right? But then he says to his disciples something to the effect of, you are about to reap where you did not sow. You are about to harvest where you didn't garden. Somebody else did the heavy lifting, and you're going to get the easy pickings, basically. And there was a great harvest as a result. But I want you to see something in this statement, in these two statements that Jesus said. First of all, he's identified a field, one field, in this case, Sychar, and also one team, God's followers, Jesus' disciples, us. But he's identifying two different seasons, a sowing season and a reaping season, a gardening season and a harvesting season, all right? And two kinds of workers, sowers and reapers, gardeners and harvesters. We're all on the same team, but we have two different jobs. And over the years, I realized in all this work that I was doing, talking in universities and doing interviews on TV and radio, all kinds of stuff like, what was I doing? I was gardening. I'm gardening. I'm not in a position to have people come to Christ in the same way I did in the Jesus movement. I'm given a lot larger venue as the Lord has provided, but what am I doing? I'm gardening. And you know what? I'm thrilled with that. I'm fine with that because I know I'm part of a greater team and God is positioning people in other people's lives in a way to communicate, garden until finally the fruit is ripe. Now I want to tell you something about ripe fruit. I became a Christian in 1973 on September 28th. I'm just approaching my 52nd Did I do my math right there? My 52nd year in Christ. And it was my younger brother, Mark, who had done most of the gardening in my life, 2 years my junior. And he came to my apartment that night. It was a Friday night in West LA. I was a student at UCLA. And he began to tell me more about Jesus. And I say, Mark, you don't have to tell me anything more about Jesus. I've already decided I want to become a Christian. Now, he tells the story a little differently. He says that when he's talking to me, what I said to him was, I already am a Christian. But in either case, let me ask you a question. Did Mark harvest me? No, I harvested myself. Well, the Holy Spirit did the harvesting, obviously. But something else was going on. And when I poll audiences, and I'm not going to do it this morning because I don't have enough time. I'm on a really tight time limit. And you give me a little extra thank you. And I shouldn't even wasted time saying that. But when I poll audiences of Christians all over the country, I've been doing it for 2 years every time I give this talk. And what I find out is it turns out the average is 75% of those people who identify as Christians did not become Christians by coming forth at an altar call or praying with someone to receive Christ. Now, I'm not against that at all. I think they're great. I'm glad people do that. But that's not the way even now people become Christians. Something else is going on. Gardening, gardening, gardening. And then, watch this, when the fruit is ripe, it drops into the basket. When the fruit is ripe, it drops in. Ripe fruit is easy to harvest, okay? And this is the idea that has kind of become so clear to me in this whole process. And now let me just add one little detail here, because I don't want you to miss the power of gardening, even though I'm not praying with someone to receive Christ. Has anybody here heard of this guy named J. Warner Wallace? Does this name sound familiar to some of you? Well, if you were here during the conference, he was right here on this stage last night. And he is, well, here's a story. J. Warner Wallace was an atheist, but an incredible cold case detective. In fact, he never lost a case that went to trial, all right? And if you watch this kind of stuff on TV, you've seen him on, Dateline? 4 of the cases that he solved were featured on Dateline. He was famous there. He was called the evidence whisperer. But J. Warner Wallace was an atheist. And he got challenged by somebody about Jesus Christ, and so he decided to take his magnificent skills as a detective, solving murders that have been cold for 10, 15, 20 or longer years, and apply them to the New Testament. And when he did, he realized Jesus rose from the dead. And therefore, he was who he claimed to be. And he became a Christian. Then he became a Christian case maker. Then he became a Christian writer, and he wrote a best-selling book called Cold Case Christianity, which you ought to get, just saying. And Jim J. Warner is one of the best. Actually, he's the best guy I've ever seen on a stage like this defending the faith. Magnificent. Here's what you don't know about J. Warner Wallace. He was in my garden when he was an atheist. He was listening to my show and the things that I had to say, and it was a major part of him becoming a Christian. He actually later came on our team eventually for a couple of years. Somebody, if you were at the conference yesterday, you also saw Big Bald and Beautiful, John Noyes. And John Noyes was an atheist in Los Angeles, and now he's an apologist, and he was in my garden too. He tells me about driving down the highway when I was on commercial radio, screaming at the radio because of what I'm saying about Jesus when he's the atheist. Now, did I lead them to Christ? No, I don't know who did. But I'll tell you one thing, what happened, somebody came into my garden and harvested my crop. Get out of my garden. No, is that my idea? No, because Jesus said in John chapter 4, the one who sows and the one who reaps can rejoice together. They're working together. And so I'm happy if anybody else leads anyone to Christ who's been in my garden. I don't care. We're all on the same team. And so consequently, I've changed my goal. My goal is a little different as a gardener. And I almost every time, I didn't do this at Kennesaw as it turned out, but usually when I speak to a non-Christian audience, I always start the same way. I'm here tonight because my life has been deeply changed by an ancient teacher. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. And 50 years ago, when I was a student at UCLA, I began to think about the claims that Jesus made, and I began to engage people and ask questions and get in arguments and pull away from the table, then come back. But I tell the audience, I finally came to the conclusion that Jesus got it right. That he saw the world the way it really was, reality, and that the smart one was on him, and I decided to follow him. Now I tell them it has not been easy, but it's been real. It's been reality. And then I tell them this, and this is the point that I'm making here. What is my goal? Excuse me, in any audience. I said, but I'm not here to convert you tonight. Collective sigh of relief, right? I said, all I want to do is put a stone in your shoe. All I want to do. Ever had a stone in your shoe? Yeah, it's not the end of the world, but it's annoying, right? You got to deal with it. So I tell them, so I'm here to annoy you a little bit. And they kind of chuckle because they expect the Christian to annoy them, and I'm your guy. But I hope you'll thank me when I'm done. I want you walking out of this auditorium with something digging at you, something that I said, something that got you thinking about Jesus, because Jesus is worth thinking about. But now here's the question. How do we shoot for that more modest goal, to put a stone in their shoe? As far as I'm concerned, I don't have to lead them to Christ to make this be a fruitful, profitable spiritual conversation. If I could just move them forward, a little hoeing, a little watering, a little pulling some weeds, that kind of thing. Paul says, I planted, Apollos watered, God caused the increase. I'm fine with that. I'm happy to be a gardener. And I guarantee you, there are a whole bunch of you in this room that are spiritually, with regards to evangelism, sitting on the bench because you have this thinking that the real measure of an evangelist is how many home runs you hit, how many deals you close, without realizing that no deal can be closed unless there's gardening beforehand, to mix the metaphor, sorry. Singles and doubles are okay. Just getting into the batter's box is okay if you have a plan. So here's my promise. In the remaining time we have left, another 20 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know, or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be. Okay, this follows basically a principle that we find in Colossians chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. So you can write that down, check it out later, but here's what it says. Colossians 4, verse 5 and 6. Paul starts out by saying, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. So he starts out by saying, be smart. Then he says, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned as it were with salt. So he says, be smart. Then he says, be nice. What a concept. And then he says, so that you will know how to respond to each person. So he says, be smart, be nice, but be tactical. In other words, people are different. Everybody's got different histories. They have different concerns. They have different issues. And he wants you to zero in on those things, okay? Think of Jesus, John chapter 4 compared to John chapter 3. Nicodemus, he beat up pretty hard. John chapter 4, woman at the well, he's kind of rope-a-dope, isn't he? He's bucking and weaving, and he's saying all this stuff, till finally he says, I who speak to you am he, the Messiah. So we want to be sensitive to those particular people. Let me give you an example of how that took place in my own life. So in a few days, I'm going to be traveling to Wisconsin. We have some property up there in northern Wisconsin, the North Woods. It's fishing country, and I like to bass fish. I imagine in Atlanta there's some bass fishermen out here because it's a good area for largemouth, but I like fishing for smallmouth bass in the North Woods. And I went out with the pastor, and we went out fishing for smallies. I caught the largest smallmouth of my personal best at the time. 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Now, that's a pretty big smallie. And I was really happy about that. Just to say, though, and since then, I got 9 smallmouth over 5. And my biggest is 513, and if that sucker would have eaten one more crawdad before he bite my bait, I'd have a 6. But nevertheless, I was really proud of that fish. So he took a snap of it, and I wanted to get it digitized so I could show it on the screen at his church where I was preaching the following week. You know, I'm flexing my fishing muscles. Those guys understand that kind of thing. And my wife and I, we took the film, F-I-L-M, right, to get developed. And the young lady there at the kiosk that was processing our order, she had a large pentagram around her neck. It's a 5-pointed star, often an occultic symbol. So I asked her about the pentagram. I said, does that jewelry have any religious significance? And she said, yes, it does. The 5 points of the star stand for earth, wind, fire, water, and spirit. Now, the bells are going off in my head, right? But I wanted to get more precise, so I said, I'm curious, does it have religious significance to you personally? Because a lot of people wear a cross, and it's not because they're Christian, so I wasn't sure. And she said, yes, it does. I'm a pagan. Now, I'm a trained professional. I'm just standing there taking us all in, but my sweet wife was standing right next to me. And when she heard this gal refer to herself as a pagan, she broke out in laughter. Then she caught herself and said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude, but I never heard anybody admit it before. You know, like, she'd only heard the word pagan when her girlfriends had called their kids in, get in here, you bunch of pagans, you know, that kind of thing. Well, she wasn't offended. She went on to explain her view, and I realized very shortly I was talking to a witch. And so I asked her, are you Wiccan? She said, yes, I am. And then she said, we respect all life. That's part of the Wiccan theology, basically. Now, I said, oh, that's great. If you respect all life, that would make you probably pro-life with regards to the abortion issue. Is that right? And she said, no, I'm actually not pro-life. I'm pro-choice. I said, isn't it odd for a witch to be pro-choice, given their theology? And she said, well, then she had said that. She said, I could never do that, referring to abortion. I could never kill a baby. Now, those are her words, not mine. I could never kill a baby. Now, it's stand to reason we train people about dealing with the abortion issue philosophically and ethically, but we don't use language like baby killing because we don't want people to think that we're using loaded rhetoric to make our point. Because we can make a point without the rhetoric is the point. But in this case, I wasn't the one that was calling abortion baby killing. It was the pro-abortion person that was acknowledging that abortion kills a baby. And I'm listening, okay? And so I had some more questions for well, actually, she qualified it. She said, I could never kill a baby. And then she gave the reason why. She said, I wouldn't want something bad to come back on me. Now, this is a strange response, I think. It's kind of a karma thing. What goes around comes around. And basically, she's saying, man, I'm not going to kill any baby. You never know what's going to happen to you if you start killing baby. Really? That's your reason? Okay. I didn't pursue that, but it seemed strange to me. Instead, I said, you know, maybe I'm glad you would kill a baby. Maybe we should stop other people from killing babies. And she said, I think people should have a choice. What is the choice that we're talking about here, by the way, explicitly? The choice to kill babies by your own admission. And this seems weird to me that she's saying this. So I asked her, you mean we should have the choice to kill babies? And she said, well, I think everything should be taken into consideration. I said, okay, what would be a legitimate consideration to make it okay to kill a baby? And she immediately said incest. Now, let me pause for a moment because you can see what's going on here. I'm pressing her for clarification on this strange thing, given the way she's acknowledged it. And she's trotting out all the pro-choice slogans, all right? But she's not thinking about it because all of these slogans are explicitly now justifications for killing children. She didn't see that because she's not paying attention. She's sloganizing. You're going to find people do this all the time on the other side. I'll tell you a secret, though. We do it, too. We just trot off these slogans and we don't think about it. We can't explain it, okay? We can't make sense out of it. So finally I said to her, I said, let me ask you a question. Let's say I had a 2-year-old that's standing here who had been conceived by incest. Now, I didn't have any children at that time, but so I could have trotted my own daughter out maybe. I said, on your view, I should be allowed to kill this girl. By the way, do you think that's consistent with the way she was thinking? Is that a fair response? Okay. I don't know, you're not giving yourself up. You're not, where's this guy taking me? I'm not even doing anything. All right. Yes, it is. And if it wasn't, she has a chance to correct me. But she didn't correct me because it was a fair application of her view. And there was a long pause there, and she's thinking. And finally she says about killing the 2-year-old, right? I'd have mixed feelings. I'd have mixed feelings about that. OMG. That's gosh, Pastor. Well, at least she's got mixed feelings. You know, maybe that's progress. Now, look at, the line is growing behind me, right? And I'm interfering now with her work product. And now I realize that my opportunity as an ambassador for Christ has come to an end. Now, if I had been of a different frame of mind, I might have said, hey, wait a minute, folks, I haven't got to the gospel. Sit down, shut up, maybe you learned something. But I didn't feel the pressure to artificially insert something that really didn't belong at this point of the conversation. I could commend this person to the Lord. When we left, my wife and I went in the car and we prayed for her and gave her to the Lord because she was my task at that point, but she's God's problem. My task at that moment for gardening, but God's problem. Now I want you to notice something about that conversation. In that conversation, I asked probably 7 different questions. I asked questions to introduce the conversation. I asked her about her jewelry. I asked questions to get more information about her point of view, to get clear on it. And then I also asked questions to expose a weakness or a flaw. I trotted out the toddler is what we call that tactic, all right? And then in my notes, at one point it said, and she was doing most of the work. But I thought about it, if she's doing most of the work, I'm doing some of the work, but I wasn't doing some of the work, I was doing none of the work. And so I changed my notes. I said, she's doing all of the work. Then I realized she wasn't working either. We weren't having a fight. There was no lines drawn in the sand. We weren't defending turf. We were just having a conversation. And that's the way I want it. And that's the way I want it. Here's kind of my principle. If I get mad, I lose. What if I don't get mad and they get mad? Sometimes you can't control that. Well, if they get mad, I lose too. If anybody gets mad, I'm going to lose. Because people are not in a persuasive mood when they're angry or when we're angry, okay? This is the power of the tactical approach. Now, it stands to reason we have lots of tactics. In the book, I have many of them that we talk about. They have names like Steamroller and Road Scholar and Taking the Roof Off and Just the Facts, Ma'am, and Inside Out. And these are all little handles, monikers that will help you remember the maneuver in conversation. That'll help you. But they all serve the game plan, and the game plan has its own name, all right? And it's the simplest game plan imaginable to stop a person in their tracks, to turn the tables, and to get them thinking. And that happened with the witch in Wisconsin. And this tactic has a name, and the name of the tactic is Columbo, as in the infamous Lieutenant Columbo of TV fame. And how many have no idea who I'm talking about? All right, that's because TV is no more, it's all cable. All right, well, Columbo is the most recognizable TV icon of all time. He even beat Lucy. And you say, who's Lucy? Right, okay, all right, never mind. He shows up at the crime scene. He's a murder detective. The murder's already been committed. You know who the bad guy is, the way the show pans out. He shows up with this trench coat like this, looks like he slept in it. I got mine at Salvation Army. My wife is the thrift store queen, and she says, whenever you buy anything at the thrift store, you got to check the pockets because you never know what you're going to find. Wait a minute. Oh my gosh, look at that. Lieutenant Columbo has a cigar. Oh, this is just plastic, Pastor Jeff. No worries at all. I actually hate cigars, I'm just saying. And every time I get a real cigar, I always destroy it, all right? By fire. All the way down, I don't want anybody to stumble, you know, I'm just saying. He also got a pad of paper, but he can't use his pad of paper, why not? He didn't have a pen or pencil. He said, guy's not prepared, you know, and he's stumbling around, scratching his head. And this guy looks stupid, but he's stupid like a fox because he's got a plan. And at some point he'll stop and put his fingers to furrowed brow and he'd say something like this. I don't know. There's something about this thing that bothers me. Do you mind if I ask you a question? Right? He asked the question, they answer. You're very intelligent. One more thing. And then he one more things him to death, right? Question after question after question. Sometimes they get annoyed. And he says, I'm sorry, it's because I'm asking all these questions, but I can't help it. It's a habit. And this is a habit you need to get into. The key to the Columbo tactic is the Christian goes on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions that advance the conversation. Let me say that again. The key to the Columbo tactic is that the Christian goes on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions to advance the conversation. Our game plan entails using questions, okay? And the game plan actually has 3 parts. I'm only gonna do 2 parts, that's all I have time for. And this is the simpler part, and it's the kind of thing you could do this morning when you have breakfast somewhere, or this afternoon talking to your friends, or whatever it is. Very, very simple, okay? Questions are engaging, they show interest in other people, all right, they get you valuable information, but here's a key, questions keep you safe. Let me say it again, questions keep you safe. Because when you're asking questions, you're not making statements. You make statements, and then somebody's gonna come after you. If you ask questions, they can't come after you about anything. You're inquisitive, you're a student of their view, if you will. Okay? Now there is a place for making our own point. That's the 3rd step, but I just want to give you these 2 steps first because that's the basic game plan you can put into play, and this is what's going to make a big difference in your life right away, okay? Here's the first step of the game plan. When I say the first step, what I mean is I don't want you thinking about anything else. I don't want you thinking what's going to happen down the line or leading anybody to Christ. When you find yourself in a circumstance where you're getting involved in something spiritual, a lot of times they'll bring it up. You know, at the dinner table at Easter or whatever, or Thanksgiving's coming up and, you know, Crazy Harry the atheist is gonna hammer you with this thing, whatever, okay? Here's the first thing you wanna do. Gather information. Gather information. That's all you wanna worry about. Gather. You wanna get intel. You want to get the lay of the land. You want to let the other person speak, all right? And now there's a model question for this. It's very simple, but it's model. You can use it a lot of different ways. And that model question is, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? All right? Very simple. Somebody said, well, the Bible's been changed. You can't trust it. Really? What do you mean it's been changed? Let them talk, all right? If they say there is no God, well, what kind of God don't you believe in? Now, if they don't believe in a God with a beard behind a, you know, throne up in the sky, I don't believe in that God either. I want to let them talk. Now, one of the reasons I want to let them talk is to get more information. But I have a suspicion that if their view is wrong, that it's going to become obvious fairly soon. At least I'll be able to see the problems with it. And the more I let them talk, the bigger the hole is that they're digging that they may fall into, because of the falsehood of their worldview, okay? I'm not trying to trick them. I'm just trying to get everything out in the open, all right? And so I'm gonna ask that question, what do you mean by that? Okay, I wanna tell you a very quick anecdote. I have enough time to get this one out, this first question, all right? First I gotta tell you, I'm gonna tell you about a waitress I talked to in Seattle on a Sunday morning. Here's something you don't know about me, but you need to know. I'm not a morning person. Before my first cup of coffee, I'm an atheist, all right? And so I had a Friday night, all day Saturday conference, somewhat like we did, multiple speakers, but I worked really hard. Sunday morning, I had to preach at a church, okay? Just like today. And I'm dragging out at Old Dark 30, right, into the little cafe next to the hotel, and I did not want to talk about Jesus. I do not want to talk about God. I don't want to talk. I just want my coffee. And this gal comes up to me, who's the waitress, who is much more energetic than is good for me at that time in the morning. So, good morning. What brings you to Seattle? You know, oh God, go away. You know, that's what I'm thinking. So I figured I'd get rid of her. I'm going to preach at the church this morning. She says, good. And I'm thinking, what's good about that? From her perspective, maybe she's a Christian. Are you a Christian? No, I'm not a Christian. I used to be a Christian, but now the universe takes care of me. And I'm thinking, huh? And so I ask her, how does the universe take care of you? Is the universe a person? I'm confused, right? And she said, no, it's not a person. Well, then how can the universe take care of you? Oh, she's thinking. I guess God takes care of me. Oh, okay, that makes sense. And God is the universe. How can that be? So I asked her some more questions. Now, let me ask you something. Do I want to witness to this woman? No. I want her to go away, but I can't help myself. My inner Columbo is coming out because I can't make sense of what she's saying. And all I'm doing is asking question number 1, right? I'm not even thinking about Columbo. Finally, she goes away. And I thought to myself, honest to goodness, there's nothing that I said that had the slightest impact on her at all. She brings me my coffee, my scrambled eggs, and at the end, she brings me my check, and here's what she says to me before she finishes. She says, nobody has ever asked me questions about my view before. And it got me thinking, OMG. I wasn't even trying to witness. I was trying not to witness. And God still used a simple set of questions to get her thinking about her own views. That's the power of this approach. And by the way, Jesus uses it all the time. So our first step is to just gather information, just in general. What do you mean by that? If they tell you what they mean by that and there's any further ambiguity, ask more. What do you mean by that question? Show a genuine interest in this person. And you can ask that question until the cows come home and there's no threat on you whatsoever. No, there is a limitation. So gentlemen, if your wife calls you an idiot, don't ask. What do you mean by that? Okay. She might say, sit down. First, you know, kind of thing. All right, so that's our first step. We're trying to figure out what they believe. And this is so helpful in so many things. Everything's relative. What do you mean by relative? What do you mean by everything? Right? Okay, so there's lots of ways to use this. Got to move on to the second step. The second step now is similar to the first step, but you're asking a different kind of question. Now you know what they believe. Next, you want to know why they believe it. And so some form of the question, how did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for that? Or why would you think that's so, is in place. Remember I used a question at the beginning when somebody says, well, the Bible's been changed. Well, tell me more. What do you think happened? And then I'll let them talk. I'll let them talk as much as they're able to talk. Sometimes, by the way, you get dead silence when you ask these questions. I'm just saying. It's what I call a Simon and Garfunkel moment. Sorry about the 60s alert there, but they wrote a song called The Sounds of Silence, and that's what you get. All right? So just let them talk, okay? And then I want to know why they believe what they believe. So the person who's asking the question about the Bible, okay, now I understand what you think happened. Why do you think that actually happened that way? That's another step. And I'm just going to say, most people cannot give you a good reason for the view that they hold contrary to yours. They haven't thought about it. They haven't been taught to think about it. They've been taught to say it really loudly as if that's an argument. Okay, and you know what I'm talking about. Now, I can't go into a lot of detail on this, but it's very, very simple. First, you find out what they believe. Questions. What do you mean by that? Then you ask them about the content of their conviction. And part of the rationale here is Christians have, especially more aggressive ones, they have the sense that if a person challenges me, I've got to refute their view. I've got to come back. I said, no, it's not your job to refute their view. It's their job to defend it first. That's the burden of proof. okay? And so when somebody makes a statement or a claim, or you're talking, just start drawing them out, just like I did with the witch in Wisconsin. When I got more details, then I started asking more questions to get more details. And notice she's digging a hole for herself. She didn't know that. But that's what ends up happening when you have a false view, okay? That's simple. Now, you might not have noticed, but I just want to draw attention to the fact that I have just fulfilled my promise to you. I promised I would give you a simple game plan that would allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know or how knowledgeable or aggressive the other person happens to be. Well, there it is. 2 steps: gather information and make them prove their view, basically give reasons for their view. 2 questions: what do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? You can use all kinds of variations, but that's the heart of it. You start doing just that, and you will be amazed at how much easier it gets for you and how much more effective it is. You will have an opportunity now to get off the bench and get engaged in a way that keeps you safe. Now, if you don't remember anything else from our time together, remember this one thing. When you find yourself in a tough situation, as you're talking about spiritual things, take a tip from Lieutenant Columbo and always ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. Don't you appreciate Greg Koukl? I mean, what a blessing he has been this entire weekend for our community. And you know, church, one of my big takeaway points of encouragement here is this. Each one of us can have spiritual conversations. You don't have to have all the answers. You and I can go out this week and just have spiritual conversations with people naturally in a way that will help us to garden. Now, as we come to the end of our time together, I want to say this. In a crowd like this, the chances are pretty high that there's some ripe fruit sitting here. What I mean by that is God is dealing with your heart. You know God exists. You know that we're morally accountable to him. And you know that none of us are good enough. And you are ready to trust Jesus, the way he died for you, the way he rose again, to take away the sin that stands between you and a perfect, holy creator. If that's you, whether you're sitting in this room or you're on the other side of that camera watching somewhere in the world right now, I'd like to pray for you. Can we all bow our heads and close our eyes? Father in heaven, we are grateful that you are still drawing people to you. And Father, for those that I just talked about, those who know that you're there, know that they're accountable to you, and they know that they fall short, and they feel you tugging at their heart. God, I pray for them that even in this prayerful moment, they would confess their faith, their trust in what Jesus has done for them to make all things right between them and you. Father, may in this moment they confess their belief that Jesus died for their sins and rose again. And Father, because of what Jesus did, we can have a relationship with the one who created us. And Father, for the rest of us, I pray for those who are believers in Jesus, those of us who are Christian. God, help us to be faithful ambassadors. Help us to do what you tell us in the New Testament. Help us to seize every single opportunity to share the gospel with others. Help us to be good gardeners. Father, we thank you for what we've experienced together this morning. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Everyone, can I have everyone's attention just for a moment? If you would like more information about what it means to say yes to Jesus, to become a Christian, we have some free literature for you. It's available out at guest services this morning. That's located out in the grand foyer if you're a guest. Go by there after we dismiss here in just a few moments and ask for the free literature, and they'll be happy to give it to you there. If you're watching online and you would like to know more about what it means to trust in Jesus, I'd love to mail to your home the same literature we're handing out here today. Go to the website imadeadecision.com, imadeadecision.com. Give us your mailing address, and if you do so, we'll put that information in the mail to your home this coming week. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, let me encourage you to hit the like button or post a comment below. And if you haven't done so already, we hope you'll subscribe to our channel to be notified of new content. Thanks again for spending time with us.